Okay, picture this. San Francisco, right? The 1960s. Fog rolling in, everything kind of gray and mysterious.
Yeah, classic San Francisco.
And somewhere down a street in Chinatown, inside a martial arts studio, there's this challenge, a showdown.
Hmm.
On one side, you've got Bruce Lee, this force of nature, just about to explode onto the scene globally.
Right, brimming with talent, ready to go.
And on the other side, a much more, well, enigmatic guy,
Mm-hmm.
Wong Jack Man,
Hmm.
a master, steeped in tradition, northern Shaolin, Taiji Quan, Shinji Quan.
A very different energy compared to Lee.
Totally. And this wasn't just some random fight.
Yeah.
It feels like a really significant moment, a clash of styles, philosophies, but it's also kind of murky historically.
That's the thing, isn't it? You have Lee, who is already building his image, pushing boundaries, definitely thinking about a bigger audience.
Yeah, very outward facing.
And then Wong Jack Man, deeply rooted in tradition, teaching quietly in the community, building respect that way, seemingly not really chasing that same kind of fame.
Exactly. Which makes it kind of surprising when you think about it. Here's a guy who literally faced off against the Bruce Lee.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, in popular culture, Wong Jack Man is, well, he's not exactly a household name, is he?
Not at all. He's remained pretty obscure, considering.
So that's the puzzle we really want to dig into. How many times has Hollywood actually shown us Wong Jack Man? How often has his story, or at least his side of that famous 1964 fight, made it to the screen? And how accurate was it when it did?
The answer is, well, it's pretty revealing about how these stories get told, or maybe don't get told.
It definitely makes you think about whose history becomes the history,
Yeah.
especially on film. That 1964 fight, even with all the different accounts.
Oh, yeah, lots of conflicting stories.
Right, but it clearly had an impact, especially on Lee's thinking, his development of Jeet Kune Do. So the fact that Wong Jack Man is barely a footnote in cinema, it says something.
It really does. It points to how Hollywood maybe gravitates towards the flashier story, the established star.
Well, wonder no more, because we looked into it. And believe it or not, there's really only one movie that puts Wong Jack Man front and center in relation to that fight.
Just one, seriously.
Just one, Birth of the Dragon from 2016. That's basically it.
Wow. Okay. Given how obsessed people still are with Bruce Lee and how pivotal that fight is often made out to be, yeah, that's surprising. You'd expect more.
You really would. It sort of fits that pattern, though, doesn't it? Focus on the big name, the guy with the built-in audience. Lee's story is just inherently cinematic, the innovation, the tragedy, the stardom.
Absolutely. Maybe Wong Jack Man's quieter, more teaching-focused life just didn't seem like easy Hollywood material. Less obvious drama, perhaps.
Perhaps. So yeah, Birth of the Dragon, that's our main exhibit here.
Mhm.
Directed by George Nolfi, written by Christopher Wilkinson and Stephen J. Revell.
Okay.
Philip Wan-Lung Ning played Bruce Lee, and Xi Yu played Wong Jack Man.
Mm-hmm.
And there was this other major character, Steve McKee, played by Billy Magnuson.
Steve McKee. Doesn't ring a bell from the real story.
Well, I'll get to him. They apparently drew inspiration from an article by Michael Dorgan called Bruce Lee's Toughest Fight.
Okay, so starting from some kind of source material, at least, that's interesting. But inspiration can lead you pretty far from the facts in Hollywood.
Oh, tell me about it. And yeah, dramatic license is putting it mildly here. So the movie sets up the fight based on this idea that Wong was furious about Bruce teaching non-Chinese students.
Right. That's one of the common theories, but it's pretty heavily disputed, isn't it?
Very disputed. And then the film just invents this entire backstory for Wong, like him being a Shaolin monk.
A Shaolin monk.
Yep, doing penance because he apparently almost killed someone with a kickback in China.
Whoa. Okay,
Yeah.
that sounds fabricated.
Totally. And then there's Steve McKee, this fictional white student who somehow gets woven into the whole thing,
Yeah.
becomes a central viewpoint character.
Ah, right. The audience surrogate, perhaps?
Pretty much. Plus, got to have some gangsters and love interest thrown in for good measure. They even call it a modern take.
Modern take is often code for we changed a lot, isn't it? Adding gangsters and romance. Classic Hollywood moves to try and broaden the appeal, but it usually pulls focus from the actual history. And the Shaolin monk thing, it just sounds like playing into stereotypes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's try and unpack this. What did the movie sort of get right? Maybe with some big caveats.
Right, where's the grain of truth?
Well, the fight did happen. 1964, San Francisco Bay Area. That much is true.
Okay, basic facts. Check.
And the film does try to capture the feel of 1960s Chinatown. The atmosphere, the sense that martial arts schools were really tied into the community, the toms, the culture there.
That setting is crucial. Chinatown back then was its own world, really. Kung Fu wasn't just a hobby, it was part of the social fabric.
Right. And it mentions Wong skills, Northern Shaolin, Taiji Quan, Jinji Quan. That's accurate.
His credentials were solid, definitely.
And here's a fascinating bit. Apparently, the real Wong Jack Man saw the film or parts of it and felt the actor, Xia Yu.
The one who played him.
Yeah. He felt Xia Yu actually captured his reserved personality, his athleticism, even though the actor apparently had no martial arts background beforehand.
Wow! That's quite something coming from Wong himself. So, even amidst all the fiction, something about the person came through in the performance.
Seems like it. The movie also hints at Bruce Lee rethinking his style after the fight.
Which lines up with reality, right? That's when he started moving away from pure Wing Chun, developing Jeet Kune Do.
Exactly. It suggests the fight, whatever actually happened, was a catalyst for Lee. It made him question things.
Yeah, it definitely seems like a key moment in his evolution as a martial artist. Win, lose, or draw, it pushed him.
And, okay, a couple more small details. The film shows the social clubs in Chinatown, which is where Wong did teach sometimes early on.
Part of that community network.
And it shows him working at the Great Eastern Cafe, which apparently he actually did for a while.
Okay, so little bits of biographical detail sprinkled in. Anchors, maybe.
Yeah, anchors in a sea of fiction. Because now we get to where Birth the Dragon just makes stuff up.
All right, let's hear the big departures from reality.
Okay, first off, Wong Jack Man as a Shaolin monk on a penance quest. Completely invented.
Yeah, I suspected as much. No basis, in fact.
None whatsoever. He was never a monk. There's zero evidence of some near-fatal kick incident driving him to America. The guy lived and taught in San Francisco until 2005.
Right, so that whole backstory is just Hollywood myth-making, adding drama, maybe, but erasing the real person.
Totally. It feels like it's playing into that whole mystical East trope.
Yeah, it simplifies and exoticizes him rather than showing the real complexities.
Then there's that other made-up fight scene, the one early in the movie, supposedly in Hainan, where Wong loses his temper and almost kills a Tai Chi grandmaster.
Also fictional.
Completely. No historical record of it, and it totally clashes with everything we know about Wong's actual personality. People described him as calm, reserved, not hot-headed.
So they invented a flaw for him, essentially, to give him some kind of arc.
Seems like it. Create a reason for his supposed penance. But again, it's just not true to the man.
Misrepresents him quite badly, then.
And then, Steve McKee, the fictional white student.
Ah, yes. Hell.
He gets so much screen time. He narrates. He has the romance subplot. You could argue the movie is almost more about him than about Wong or even Lee sometimes.
That's problematic. It's a classic and often criticized Hollywood move, isn't it? Centering a white character in a story about people of color.
Exactly. Apparently, he was loosely inspired by Steve McQueen, who was a student of Bruce Lee's. But this character's role in the Wong Jack Man story is pure invention.
And even Wong himself reportedly said the character was sort of necessary for the movie's structure. That's interesting.
Yeah, but fans were definitely critical. It just feels like it dilutes the focus, pushes Wong and Lee slightly to the side in their own story.
It sidelines the actual subjects, yeah. It's a narrative crutch that often undermines the story it's trying to tell.
And don't get me started on the gangsters. Anti-Blossom, the whole crime subplot.
Let me guess.
No basis in reality. None. Zero evidence. Pure Hollywood filler. Probably to inject some action or stakes that they felt were missing.
Standard playbook stuff, but again, takes away from the real core of the story.
And finally, the movie's main reason for the fight. Wong challenging Lee over teaching non-Chinese people.
Right, we mentioned that's disputed.
Heavily. Wong himself and his students like Scott Jensen, they pushed back on that idea. They suggested other things. Maybe it was a straightforward challenge. Maybe Wong felt he needed to test Lee. Maybe other personal issues were involved. Just not the simplistic version the movie presents.
So the film picked one contested motive and ran with it as the reason, which simplifies things but loses the nuance, the uncertainty of the real history.
Exactly. It makes for a cleaner story, I guess, but not necessarily a true one. And considering Wong's reserved nature compared to Lee's very public persona.
That probably contributed to the different accounts, right? Lee was shaping his narrative publicly. Wong was much more private. His side of the story just wasn't broadcast in the same way.
Makes sense. So, okay, let's talk about the real Wong Jack Man for a minute. Who was he beyond the movie version?
Right, let's get back to the actual history.
Born in Hong Kong, 1941. trained under some really respected masters like Ku Yuqiang. He was skilled enough to be giving demonstrations in China even when he was young.
So a serious martial artist with a strong lineage right from the start, not some wandering monk.
Not at all. He comes to San Francisco in the early 60s, starts teaching initially at one of those Chinatown social clubs, works that job at the Great Eastern Cafe, just integrating into the community there.
Establishing himself, building his reputation through teaching.
Yeah. And later, he set up more formal teaching spots. Fort Mason Center, First Unitarian Church in Oakland, places he taught for decades, right up until 2005.
Wow, decades of teaching. That's commitment.
Absolutely. He influenced generations of students, people like Scott Jensen, Rick Wing. They're still carrying on his teachings, his legacy.
That speaks volumes, doesn't it? The dedication of his students, the continuation of his specific styles. That's a different kind of impact than movie stardom.
Totally different. And his personality.
Hmm.
By all accounts, the polar opposite of Bruce Lee's public image. Reserved, very traditional, didn't seek the spotlight.
Quiet influence.
Exactly. His life was about the teaching, the practice. Perry Young, from Father June from the show Warrior.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he was actually one of Wong Jack Man's students. And he's spoken about Wong's incredible skill, but also his deep humility.
That fits the picture, doesn't it? Skilled but understated, which again probably explains why his version of the 1964 fight wasn't as loud as Lee's.
Definitely. He wasn't out there crafting a public narrative in the same way.
Which brings us back to the question, why only one movie, and a heavily fictionalized one at that?
Yeah, why so little attention? Well, the massive shadow of Bruce Lee is obviously huge, right? Hollywood loves a known quantity, an icon.
Easier to market, easier to finance a film about Bruce Lee or connected to him, commercial reality.
For sure. And then there's the simple fact that there just isn't a ton of documented info about Wong's life, especially before that fight. He wasn't courting publicity.
Makes it harder for screenwriters, doesn't it? If you want to be accurate, you need sources, details. If they aren't readily available.
You either don't make the film or you start inventing things, like Birth of the Dragon did.
Right. Fills the gaps, but with fiction.
Plus, the fight itself is just controversial. So many conflicting versions of what happened, who won, how long it lasted.
Making a movie means picking a side, or at least an interpretation, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And that's guaranteed to annoy someone.
Exactly. You risk alienating Lee's fans or Wong's students and supporters. We saw that with the reaction to Birth of the Dragon, it got criticized from different angles. Maybe filmmakers just think, why step into that minefield?
Avoid the controversy altogether. Stick to safer ground.
And maybe it's just Hollywood being Hollywood. Sticking to formulas, familiar stories. Developing a nuanced film about a lesser-known, quieter figure is just harder work. Maybe seen as riskier than another story tangential to a big star.
There's definitely an inertia towards proven formulas and big names.
Yeah.
It takes more effort, more vision, maybe, to tell those less obvious stories.
But, maybe things are changing. With streaming platforms hungry for content, looking for diverse stories.
Yeah, there's potentially more space now for niche histories, for more authentic deep dives, right?
I wonder, could we see a better portrayal someday? Like a limited series about his teaching years, maybe, or his roots in Hong Kong, or even just a solid documentary that talks to the people who are still around, gets all the different perspectives on the 64 fight out there.
That would be fascinating. A documentary could really explore the conflicting accounts without having to pick one definitive narrative. Just present the evidence, the testimonies.
Yeah, I think there's an audience for that. People who love martial arts history beyond just the big movie myths.
Definitely. There's an appetite for more authentic stories, for understanding the real people behind the legends.
So wrapping up this deep dive then, the main thing is Wong Jack Man's only real moment in the cinematic spotlight so far is Birth of the Dragon.
And it's a moment that takes, let's say, significant liberties with the truth.
Big time. Fun movie, maybe, for some.
Yeah.
But not a reliable source on his life or that fight. And it really highlights that issue of, filtering stories about figures like Wong through a fictional white character.
It serves as a good case study in how history gets processed and often distorted by Hollywood filmmaking. Entertainment value versus factual accuracy.
And the contrast between that movie Wong
Yeah.
and the real Wong Jack Man is just huge.
Yeah. The reality is this reserved, dedicated teacher whose influence was deep and long-lasting in the martial arts community, even if it wasn't flashy or widely publicized.
A quiet impact, like you said. Not the kind that usually gets the big screen treatment compared to someone like Bruce Lee.
It really underlines how we should probably look beyond just the most famous names to get a fuller picture of any history, martial arts included.
Absolutely. It just makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Why do some figures blow up into these huge cinematic legends, while others, who are maybe just as influential in their own sphere, stay in the shadows?
Hmm.
What other stories are out there, waiting for someone to tell them more truthfully? Maybe it's a prompt for you, listening, to dig a bit deeper into martial arts history,
Hmm?
beyond the usual suspects.
Yeah, a final thought maybe. How much does our focus on the big, loud narratives shape what we even think history is? What important figures, what crucial context are we missing when we only look at the brightest stars? Exploring those quieter corners can give you a much richer, much more complete understanding.